Morning. Let's get started. Today's daf in the Masechet Avodah Zara is Mem Gimel, I believe, 43. Nun Gimel, thank you. Something didn't add up there. And we're up to the Mishnah at the bottom of Nun Bet, Amud Bet, not quite the bottom.
I just have to leave about 10 after 8, though.
Okay, we'll get as much as we can in your time. Hopefully, we'll get you to the Mishnah at the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Bet. Says the Mishnah, we've had this many times. A lot of this is review. A non-Jew can cancel an idol that's his or somebody else's, meaning even if it's not his own personal idol, he can cancel the idol of another non-Jew. And in Yisrael, a Jew cannot cancel the idol of a non-Jew. Now, as we said yesterday and many times before, a Jewish worshipped idol can never be canceled. That's what we said with some baseter. You have to hide that, right? So you can't cancel an idol that was worshipped by a Jew ever. It's only idols worshipped by non-Jews. The non-Jew can cancel it, but the Jew is not enough to cancel it. That's the Mishnah. It continues the Mishnah. If you cancel an idol, you cancel all the accoutrements that go with that idol. If the idol is worshipped with, different plates and trays and incense and things, that all becomes canceled. But if you're mevatel mishamsheha, if you cancel those things, the accoutrements, nishamshin mutarin v'hiasura, those are canceled, but the idol itself remains prohibited because maybe you just changed the method in which you worship the idol. Now, says the Gemara, a very interesting story, which we love these. Matni le Rebbe, the Rebbe Shimon Berei, right? Rebbe was teaching his son, Rebbe Shimon. We often have very cute, interactions between Rebbe and his son. And he told him the following, Ovei kochavim mevatal v'da kochavim shelo v'shel chavero. And a non-Jew can cancel an idol that's his and of his friend, which is what our Mishnah says, right? Amar le, so his son said to him, Rebbe, this is a big debate, calling his father Rebbe because he was his teacher and his father. But he said, my teacher, Shanita lano biyaldutcha, you used to teach us when you were younger, which is a funny thing for a son to say to his father, right? When you were a kid, whatever that means. But it's yaldutcha is your kid. Okay, you taught us when you were a kid. Shanita lano biyaldutcha, ovei kochavim mevatal v'le kochavim shelo v'shel Yisrael. You used to say his and a Jews, and now you're saying his and another non-Jews. So clearly you changed your mind, right? Says the Gemara, so why, that was his son asked him that question. He asked, now, before we explain, hello, Miriam, before we explain what Rebbe changed his mind about, ask the Gemara, how could you cancel the Yisrael Mika Mevatla? Can you cancel an Avodah Zara of a Jew? We said yesterday and many times that the idol of a Jew has to be hidden. The question here was where you have a partnership, where you have an Avodah Zara owned by a non-Jew and a Jew. Rebbe, when he was younger, taught that a non-Jew can cancel that idol. When he got older, whatever older means, he no longer had that opinion, and he felt that a non-Jew an Ovei Kuchavim can only cancel an idol of an Ovei Kuchavim, not one that was owned in partnership with the Jew.
Where are you?
So we're five lines from the bottom of Nun Bet Amud Bet.
What's the difference between a non-Jew and Ovei Kuchavim?
Same thing, right? Ovei Kuchavim it's as opposed to a Jew. I'm just using different terminology. Ask the Gemara, so what did Rebbe think originally, and what does he think as he gets older? So when he was younger, he thought Yisrael Ovei Kuchavim Palach, that the Jew is worshiping this because he's sort of in cahoots with the non-Jew, meaning the non-Jew says this is a great God, it's worshipped, it's very respectful, it's done miracles, and the Jew is relying on that to worship it. But once the non-Jew says, I no longer care about this idol, the Jew no longer cares about it either, right? Even though you might think that the Jew, because it's done in partnership, that basically he only believes in it because of his partner. Once his partner cancels it, he doesn't believe in it either. But when he got older, he felt that's not clear. Yisrael, a Jew is worshiping this on his own dot, and the fact that it's partnered with a non-Jew and the non-Jew canceled it doesn't cancel it for the Jew. When the non-Jew cancels it, he's canceling his own worship. So that is the first explanation of this story. Now, Ika, 2 lines on the bottom, Ika dematin la seifa. There's some who had this statement of Reb Hillel Breder Valis on the end part of the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Yisrael eino mevatel v'ena kuchavim shalvei kuchavim, that a Jew cannot cancel an idol that's owned by a non-Jew. Now, pshita, that seems pretty obvious. I can't walk over to someone else's idol and say, yes, it's not an idol, right? What does that change? Amar Reb Hillel Breder Valis. That's what Reb Hillel Breder Valis said. Lo nitzcha el sheyesh bo shutafut. It means even if he's a partner in this, kamash malan, and the chiddush is Yisrael hu delo mevatel, that the Jew cannot cancel the portion of the Ovei Kochavim. Avo Ovei Kochavim dinafshe mavato. The Ovei Kochavim can cancel his own idol, even if it's owned in partnership with the Jew. That's a big question. What does that mean, right? Because the Jewish part is still asur. Like maybe if you sell it, you can keep the value of the part that was owned by the non-Jew, but that is what he's telling us. And fourth line, a third version of this, or Ika dematin la abraita. Some said that this statement of Revalis, which is an interesting name, right? Philip Breder Ravalis, was said about a Braita. The Braita says in the Tosefta, Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Omer, Avodah kochavim shel Yisrael ein la betela olamit. You can never cancel Avodah Zara of Yisrael. So Gemara asks, my olamit, like that's a very definitive statement. What are you adding or teaching us by adding the word olamit? And that's where Amar of Hillel Breder Ravalis, l'nitzchel sheyesh lo avodah kochavim b'shutfut. That's saying even if it's not entirely owned by a Jew, but it's a partnership between a Jew and a non-Jew, the chiddush is that even if the non-Jew cancels it, we don't say, as we thought in the beginning when Rebbe was young, that, oh, a Jew is only worshiping this as part of a partnership, but once the partnership dissolves, he doesn't care anymore. The chiddush is that he has his own worship and it's therefore prohibited, or at least his part is prohibited forever. Continues the Mishnah now, top of Daf Num Gimel Amid Aleph. Ketzad mivatla. Right? And again, we've had all these things before a little bit, but this is the definitive Mishnah. How, in fact, the birds are coming to learn daf. Okay, how is a Avodah Zara canceled? Says the Mishnah, Katarosh azno, cut off the tip of the ear, or Rosh Chotma, or the tip of the nose, or Rosh Etzba, the tip of a finger, right? So meaning make a mark that shows that this thing is no longer whole. Pichasa, if you shrink it, literally means you crush it, right? You push it in, even if you're not missing any part, we'll ask in the Gemara what that means exactly, then it's bitla. That's enough to be mevatel. However, if you're rok bifana, you spit in front of it, or hishtin bifana, you urinate, or garara zarak, garara, you drag it in the mud, or zarak batatsoa, you throw excrement at it. Harezu ena betela, that is not mevatel. We'll see in the Gemara why, but that's because these are all temporary things that don't affect the idol. So you're angry one day, that doesn't mean that you actually cancel it. Machra o mishkana. Now let's say you sell your idol, right? You come on tough times and you sell your idol for money, or you need to borrow money and you give your idol as a surety, as a guarantee. Does that show that you no longer respect this idol? So says the Mishnah, Rebbe Omer Bitel, the Chachamim Omrim Lo Bitel. So look at Rebbe and the Chachamim, whether that shows that you have removed the godly quality from this thing and it's just money, right? Or if you might still want to come back to it, you're just on really hard times.
So going back to like the middle where he said that he's disrespecting the idol and it wouldn't work, isn't it because that's the way that they actually worshipped Marculis and Peor?
So we'll see in a second. I mean, certainly those idols, it's not a question, right? If you urinate in front of an idol and that's the avodah, then you're clearly not canceling it. But the point is, let's say you take an idol that's not done that way, right? So this is certainly an action that's denigrating the idol. To pull an idol through the mud, is something there. So it's not because it's the way you worship that. It's because it's not permanent.
Okay.
But we'll see. We're going to actually see the pasuk in a second. Says the Gemara, first of all, kilo chisra b'may bitla. I don't get it. If you say you're pichasa, I mean you crush it, but you don't actually remove anything. So what did you do to the thing? Amar Zara, it means shepichasa b'faneha. It means you crushed in the face, meaning you ruined the form, right? It was a clay idol, let's say, or a metal idol, and you ground in the face so that the nose and the eyes were not there, even though you didn't actually remove them. But that ruins the form, and that puzzles it. Now we continued in the Mishnah and said, Rakak b'faneh, if you spit in front of it, hishtin b'faneh, you urinate in front of it, it doesn't cancel it. Minani mili, how do we know that? The question you just asked Miriam. Amar Chizkiah, said Chizkiah, well, it's based on this really interesting nevuah in Yeshayahu. Damar Krat, because Yeshayahu is chastising the people, and Yeshayahu says to the people, right, the pasuk of Haya ki yirav. What will happen is these are people that become, they worship idols. This is the story in Yeshayahu. they become starving, right? You become hungry. Hit katsaf, and they get worried and angry. The kilel b'malko belohav, they curse their gods and their kings. Upanala mala, and they look to God, which happens all the time, right? People come on hard times and they reject their idols and they turn back to Hashem. But then the pasuk continues and says that's not enough, though. It says in the next verse, then they forget about God. El Eretz Yabdit, they look back to the earth, etc., etc., etc. And it implies that Afal Gav Kilel Malgov Elohav, Panolamala, even though they initially reacted by cursing the God and turning to Hashem, El Eretz Yabdit, ultimately people go back to their ways. And so if you don't actually change the idol and you just change yourself, that's never enough, which is you can have a lot of discussion in psychology about that, but that's based on this pasuk in Yeshayahu. So just doing an action that denigrates it but doesn't change it is not enough because you'll go back to it. Now, the next thing in the Mishnah was machra u mishkanta. Person sold the idol or gave it as a guarantee for his loan. Rebbe says it's batel. Chachamim say it's not batel. Ziri Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now, there was a machloket between Ziri in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, not a machloket, there was a statement, and Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rav, these two people, we don't know which one said what. Chad Amar machloket b'tzoref avei kochavim. That, the machloket is if you to what's a tzoref, like a smelter, right? Who is a non-Jew, meaning you gave the idol and said, I sold it. I take $100 for this idol, and you gave it to someone who's non-Jewish. Right? We'll see why that matters. But if you give it to a Jew who's a smelter, to break it down, a junk shmata guy, right? Divrei hakol bitel. Everyone agrees that it's batel, because presumably the Jew is not going to worship it. By giving it by a non-Jew, giving their idol to a Jew, they know that they're giving up its worship. They give it to a non-Jew, maybe they think maybe the guy will worship it. Right? V'chad Amar ben, one said the opposite, not the opposite, but different. The Tzaref Yisrael machloket, that they argued we'll see. I argued by a Jewish smelter about whether it's canceled or not canceled. So now ask the Gemara, the obvious question. The Tzaref Yisrael machloket al v'tzaref avei kochav nevri hakol lo bitel. Is he saying only by a Jew is there an argument? Maybe you canceled your idol by giving it to a Jew, maybe you didn't, but by a non-Jew, for sure you didn't cancel it. Or maybe what they're saying is it's a machloket by both. Whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew, the fact that you gave over your idol doesn't mean one opinion is that you canceled it, and one opinion is that you're desperate, you need money. So you're hoping that this person will keep it and will worship it. You didn't necessarily give up on it, you're just desperate for money. So we don't know the answer yet. Tashma, let's prove it from the following statement. The Amar Rebbe, Sabraita. Rebbe said, near in Divarai, says Rebbe, I say, right? Remember Rebbe said in our Mishnah that the idol is canceled. Says Rebbe, it seems that I am correct. When you sold it for destruction, for someone to break it down. And my friends who say that it's usher are if you sell it to worship it. Now, says, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What do you mean for destruction and worship? If you think chavala means literally destroying it, and the ovda means ovda mamish, meaning you put up a sign and saying selling an idol for further worship or selling an idol for destruction, right? So then it should be obvious, right? Why would anyone disagree, right? My time at the manam or bitel, my time at the manam or lo bitel. Seems like you've been very clear about your intentions. Elalav, the chavala means not that you gave it for the purpose of destroying it, but you gave it lemish atid l'chavla. You gave it to someone who's likely to destroy it, and money tzarif Yisrael, right? That's a Jew who presumably is not going to worship the idol. In the gravel business, ula ovda, and when you say to worship, it means lemish atid l'ovda umanu tzarif ovei kochavim. And what you see from here is that since Rebbe said, I'm more logical in this case by a Jew, and the Chachamim are more logical, in the case of a non-Jew, it seems, it seems that they're arguing by both. Says, well, that's not a proof. Well, because very often, hachikam, this is what Rebbe means to say, but the third to last narrow line, that Amar Rebbe is saying, near in divarai l'chaverai, my words that says it's permitted seem to be more logical than my friends. Kishem machra l'chavala. When you sell it to be destroyed, meaning umanu tzarif Yisrael, she'af chaverai lo nechleku alai, because they don't even argue with me, meaning according to this language, they agree with me that if you sell it to a Jew, it's permitted. They only argue ela kishem machra lo ovda, right? They only argue with me if you sell it to worship it. But if you're selling it to a Jew, where presumably they're going to destroy it, modally, the Chachamim admit to me that that canceled the idol. So if a non-Jew sells their idol to a Jew, they understand that it's canceling the idol, and I'm giving up on worshiping it.
We said multiple times, however, that Jew cannot cancel the idol of a non-Jew.
Correct. But if the non-Jew can cancel it by selling it to the Jew, meaning the non-Jew is showing his intention to no longer worship this idol because he gives it over to a Jew who he knows is not going to respect it. So 100%, but it's the action of the non-Jew that would cancel the idol in this case. Meitve. Now, ask the Gemara on the first wide line, what about the following Braita, which I think we've quoted before, but we're certainly going to have later. Let's say a person buys broken down pieces of metal. You know, you get the junk box from the non-Jew, right? And you find in the pieces of discarded junk that there's an idol, there's an icon. So what do? Says the Braita, if you haven't given the money yet, right? So then yachsir, then you can say cancel the sale. But if you gave money and then you picked up the box, then it's yours. You have no way out of it. And once a Jew owns an idol, you can't cancel that. So yolech li'am, you got to throw the idol into the sea, right? Now, ask the Gemara, I don't understand the case here. If a non-Jew is selling a box with metal to a Jew and there's an idol in it, you just said that's canceling the idol. So what if the Jew finds the idol? It's canceled. So if there's a machloket about selling it to a Jew, so you could say this is going according to the person who says it's aser. Hamani rabbanan he that it's prohibited. If you say they only argue by a non-Jew selling it to a non-Jew, Hamani, who's the author of this Braita? Why would it be a problem if a Jew bought an idol even unwittingly? Says the Gemara, because obviously the point here is that it's unwittingly, right? Shani hatam da'adaita degruta od savit, right? Adaita davodat kochavim lo zavit. The guy didn't sell you an idol. The guy sold you a box of metal, which he didn't realize had an idol in it. So he didn't actually cancel the idol. It was a mistake. That's the whole point of the Braita. But if he knowingly said to you, here, I don't need this idol anymore. Take it and give me $50. That is enough maybe to cancel the idol. Tanurabanan. So let's see another Braita, which is a Tosefta on our Mishnah. It says in the Braita, lavu aleha. Let's say a guy borrows something on his idol, right? Here's $100. This is the idol, is the guarantee. Osha nafla aleh mapolet. Or the house falls on the idol and they don't clear it up. Osha ganvu listim. Or it's stolen by robbers. Osha nichua ba'alim hochlim dinatayam. Or the owners say, we are moving to Alaska, and they leave it behind. Okay, so these are all cases where basically the person seemed to abandon their idol, right? They let it be stolen, meaning they didn't file a police report. They didn't clear the house that fell on top of it. They borrowed money against it. So says the Braita, im atidin lachzar ki melchemet Yoshua. If they're planning on coming back, right? They leave their idol, but they say, we're coming back in 3 months, like the War of Yoshua. The Gemara is going to ask what that has to do, because the War of Yoshua, nobody came back, right? That was the whole point of the war, is that Yoshua killed the nations and didn't let them return. But if they're going to come back, Eino Betela, then it's not canceled. Now, before we ask a question from this Braita, says the Gemara B'tzricha, you need all 4 of these cases, right? 4 different types of abandoning your idol. The itana lava aleha, if you just said the non-Jew borrowed money on their idol, maybe they're not canceling their idol, they're just desperate for money, right? Had they given up on the idol, they would have sold it. The fact is here, they just said, okay, I'll borrow $100, hold the idol, because you need something for a guarantee, but I'm hoping to get the money back to redeem my idol, right? So you might have thought, mida lo zavna lo batla, that he didn't sell it, so clearly he's still attached to the idol. So it's not enough that he loaned it out. Aval nafla lemapolet. But look, if the house fell on it and he didn't clear the house, he just left it there. Midalo kamafni la, he didn't clear the space. Ema betuli batla. Maybe that's where the non-Jew says, okay, forget about this idol. The house fell on it. I'm not digging it out. It's done. So tzricha, to tell you that that also, if he plans on coming back, is a problem. Vitana nafla lemapolet. If it just said, the second case, where the house fell on it, mishum desavar, because maybe the non-Jew is not canceling his idol because he thinks, look, I don't have a chance to get an excavator right now, but the idol is safe and sound under the wreckage, right? When I have time, I'll come and find it. Hamanchet, it's sitting there, meaning I'll come get it later. Call ema diba'ina la shakilna la. When I need an idol, I'll get a tractor and I'll dig it out. Avol ganvu listim, right? But if it's stolen, if you don't chase after the robbers, you're never going to see your thing again, right? If you don't get the car in the first 24 hours, you never get it again. So midloka mahadra batre, the fact that he didn't chase after it and make an effort to find the stolen thing, but batla, clearly he's showing, okay, I tried, I love this idol, but it left me, right? And he cancels it. Tzricha. So you need to say that case, meaning the case is that if he says, I want to come back for it, he hasn't canceled it. Vitana ganvu listim. And if you had just the third case of it was stolen, you would say, well, look, you shouldn't discover. Maybe the person thinks, look, look, I don't know who stole this, but maybe they stole it to sell it as an idol, right? The fact is, just because they stole it does not mean they're going to cancel it. If a non-Jew stole it, miflach palachla, he will bow down to it. So my idol has not been canceled. It's going to be repurposed, right? Yisrael shakla. If a Jew sold it, now the Jew is not necessarily going to get rid of the idol because the Jews want money. It's a valuable object. Right? It's much more valuable to sell a statue as an icon than to ground it down and you sell it as metal. So the non-Jew thinks, whether it's right or not, that the Jew is going to want to do the thing that's the highest value with this, and he's going to sell it for idol worship. Right? So you might think that even if someone steals something, a person does not think I lost it, or I lost the idol. He thinks it found another home, right? But he doesn't cancel it mentally. But if you go on an extended holiday and you don't bring your idol with you, it's like leaving your animals behind, right? You're saying, since you didn't bring it with you, you're canceling it. So therefore, we need to tell you about all these cases that the non-Jew doesn't necessarily cancel it just by borrowing money on it, by giving it, by not excavating it, by not chasing after the robbers, because there's a rationale in all these cases that maybe it'll still be worshipped. Now, the end of the Braita was, Im atidin lachzar ki Milchemet Yoshua eino betela, right? If he's planning on coming back, like they came back after the wars of Yehoshua, it's not batel. It says, what do you mean? Midi Milchemet Yoshua mahadar hadar. No one came back. The whole point of the wars of Yeshua was that they were wars of destruction, right? Yeshua was told, as we had in the Parshiot even today, right? Don't make any treaties. Don't give any peace to people. Kill them, right? That's a terrible model to use for an example of someone coming back. It says, no, hachi kamer. This is what it means to say, im atidim lachzor, if the non-Jew is planning to come back, then harehu kimilchemet Yoshua ve'ein la betela. Then it is like the Milchemet Yehoshua, meaning that it's not canceled. It's like when Yoshua came into Eretz Yisrael and they found all the Avodah Zara, they had to destroy them. It's like that, meaning you have to destroy this idol the way you have to destroy the idols that Yoshua found when he came into Eretz Yisrael. Says well, okay, that's a nice reading, but it's a little bit bizarre that we should mention Yoshua in this context, right? Lamali the mitlaya b'Milchemet Yoshua. Where did Yoshua come from? Like, why in the world are you mentioning him? Answers the Gemara, Milta Agav Orche Kamashmon. It's actually coming here to teach you a whole nother point. And the whole other point is very interesting, I could say philosophical or maybe theological debate, which is, Yehada Amar Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda Amar Rav is quoted as saying, let's say you have a Yisrael Shazakaf Leveina L'Shtachavotla. You have a Jew who sets up a levena, a brick is literally how we mean it, but like a piece of stone, thank you, to bow down to it, right? So a Jew sets up this thing with the intention of bowing down to it, but he didn't bow down to it yet, okay? And it's his. And a non-Jew comes and says, great, this looks like a beautiful stone. I'm going to bow down to it. Says Rav Yehuda Marav, Asra. It's Asr. Now, how could it be Asr? The non-Jew doesn't own it. How could the non-Jew come to a Jewish-owned thing and say, I'm going to worship this thing? It's not his thing. So ask the Gemara, Minalan da Asra. How do you know that becomes Asr? And that is what we learn from Yehoshua. Amar Rebbe Lazar, Kitchila Eretz Yisrael. It's like the beginning of moving into Eretz Yisrael, the initial occupation. The Amar Rachmana, because as the Jews went into Eretz Yisrael, as we're going to have next week's parsha, Re'eh, it says, Asherehem tisrafun be'esh. When you go into Eretz Yisrael and you see all the trees that they worship, you should burn them. Now, why should you burn the trees? Ask the Gemara, this is a great question. Michti, look, Yerushahi lahem me'avotechem. right? God told Avraham that you can have Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, I love this conclusion, all the trees in Eretz Yisrael belong to the Jews. So if a non-Jew, if a Canaanite comes and bows down to a tree, why does that make it prohibited? It's not his tree, right? It's the Jew's tree. So how could the trees of Eretz Yisrael even become asur if they didn't belong to the non-Jew, right? So where are we? How can you prohibit something that's not yours? Now you're going to say, what about the trees that were there before Avraham got it, right? Those should be okay by just canceling them, meaning by the non-Jew canceling them. Ella, what the chiddush is, the reason the Gemara is telling you, the reason that the trees of Eretz Yisrael became asur, just a fascinating and complicated halacha, is midapochu Yisrael le'egel. When the Jews left Egypt and bowed down to the egel, what they said about themselves is, we are now idol worshippers. And once they said, we are now idol worshippers, everything we own is subject to being worshipped by somebody else. So now, if the non-Jews in Israel, the Canaanites, bow down to the trees that are supposedly owned by the Jews, it's okay to become an idol. It will become an idol because the Jews don't mind, because they have shown by bowing down to the egel, says the Gemara now, Golo adatayo tenichalu bavadat kochavim. They have revealed that they are now idol worshippers. When the non-Jews come and bow down to the trees in Canaan, shlichuta didu avdi. They're basically doing what's been proved by the Jews, the same way that Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel said that if you set up a stone to worship and someone else worships it, it's considered to be worshipped because you showed you want someone to worship it. Says Gemara, Hachanami, this is Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, sorry, I'm finishing it. Yisrael shezakaf lefeina, a Jew sets up a stone to be worshipped. Gali daite denichlu b'avodat kochavim. He's showing, even though he hasn't worshipped it yet, that he's happy for someone to worship idols. And when when the non-Jew comes and actually prostrates himself and bows down to the stone, he's basically doing the will of the Jew. So that is the reason we're telling you this chiddush, that we're teaching you this halacha, which you could tell now it's clearly a novel halacha, that the reason all of the trees and places in Eretz Yisrael are asur is because the Jews did the egel. And by doing the egel, they revealed that they like Avodah Zara. And so when the Canaanites bowed down to it, they were fulfilling the wishes of the Jewish people. Says the Gemara, slow down. You made a big leap there, right? A lot of big leaps. But Dilma, the egel hudenichalo, right? The Jews bowed down to the golden calf, but that doesn't tell you about anything else. How do you lo? Maybe it was a very local, specific thing. They fell in love with the calf. They worshiped the calf. How do you know they were doing all kinds of Avodah Zarah, like Asherah? Says the Gemara, well, there's a very interesting pasuk by the egel. Amakra, what does it say? Ela Elohecha Yisrael. Right? These are your gods. So what do you mean these are your gods? This is the egel. It shows that they went off the path and worshipped many gods, meaning they totally gave up in that moment, right? To worship Avodah Zarah. Allahu Tarbe. Says the Gemara, okay, fine. So the Jews had a terrible moment and they worshiped the calf and other idols and they revealed that they wanted idol worship. But then they came back from that, right? So maybe only the things that were present in Canaan at the time of the egel became prohibited. But then the Jews did tshuva, right? They came back to Hashem. And so maybe every tree that grew after that should be permitted. Says, well, you're right, but man mucha, who can tell? Who can tell which trees were around at the egel, right? Only 40 years later, and which trees were not. And therefore, because the Jews revealed their desire to do Avodah Zarah at the egel, all the trees of Eretz Yisrael that were then worshipped by the Canaanites became prohibited as well. Yeah, very, very fascinating. Okay, we're now at the second wide line. I hope Ken was able to join till then. I know he's got to run to shul. Says the Mishnah now. The next case, Avodat Kochavim Shehenichuha Avodah B'Shat Shalom. Right? If let's say you have people who worship an idol and they abandon it, they give up on the temple, they run away. Now, of course, if it's a war, then you don't say they abandoned their idol necessarily. They had to run away for their lives. But if it's B'Shat Shalom, if it's a time of peace, then that's an indication that they no longer worship this idol. It's canceled, and anybody can go, any Yisrael can go and hang out in that temple and climb on the church, and do whatever they want. So it says the Mishnah, Bishat Shalom Muteret, but Bishat Milchama Asura. If they ran away for war, then they only ran away for their lives, but it wasn't because they wanted to cancel the Avodah Zara. Continues the Mishnah, the fourth line, Bimusot Shamalachim. Bimusot, I don't know in English how you translate that. Right. So bimusot means platforms, right? That are made out of stone, but there must be some I don't know, religious word for it, that were made for kings. So they used to make, basically when the kings would come.
They translate it as pedestals here.
Pedestals. Okay, that's a very good word. So when these things were made for kings, that you would put idols on top of them, basically, when the king came by. So this was not the idol, but it was made as the altar, basically the altar, but the basis. Sorry. Plinth. Oh, wow, that's a word. Okay, so these things, harei mutarot, they in fact are permitted. Why? Because they only place the idols on that when the kings come. Now we're asking the Gemara, why does that make it permitted? That should make it prohibited. But the Gemara will ask that question in a minute. Says Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amarav. Says Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amarav, a very interesting historical thing. Beit Nimrod, the house of Nimrod, which I guess was around in those days, but I don't think is around today, meaning the Migdal Bavel, right? The remnants of the tower that were made by Nimrod, who was in what we refer to as the Gemara, as the pasuk of Bavel. That harehi kavodat kochavim shenichu avdeh b'shat shalom umutar. That is the category of an idol that was left during peace and is mutar. Now, even though, of course, it was not left during peace, because if you recall in the pasuk, Hashem confused them all and they fought and they had to run away because afagav badrinhu rachmana, even though God dispersed them, right? The fact is that they could have come back later. Kishat milchamadami, and that's considered to be like a war. But ihavi boy lemehedar hadar. If they wanted to come back, they could have come back, right? Hashem did it then, but they have hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, to return. Mida lo hadar betuli batla. And the fact that they didn't come back cancels it. And this teaches us about our Mishnah, that even if people leave something because of a war, when the war is over, if they don't come back, they are showing that they're mifatel. It's only that the running is not an excuse, but the not coming back is reason to prohibit the Avodah Zara, not to prohibit, to permit the Avodah Zara as being batel. Now, at the two dots, bimusot shamalachim harelu mutarot, right? So the Mishnah said the platforms, the plinths of the kings are mutar because the kings only put idols there when the kings come by. So what? It should be permitted because they put idols there when the kings come by. It's the opposite, right? It should be prohibited for that reason. Says the Gemara, no. What it means to say, Amar Rabbi Rabbi Chanan, Rabbi Yochanan, Hachi Kamar. This is the explanation of the Mishnah. They only place idols there when the kings come by, and the kings really don't respect these things. The king leaves this path and doesn't come and goes somewhere else, meaning they put in all this energy for the king, and the kings don't respect it. The fact that the kings don't feel compelled to come on the path that has the idols shows that they don't respect the idols, right? And therefore, since it's only done for the kings and the kings don't care, the fact is it's not worshipped. And so because the king leaves it is why it is permitted, not because the king worships it. Now, Kiata Ula, when Ula came to, I guess he came to Eretz Yisrael, right? Where did Ula come to? Does it say? Ula came to Eretz Yisrael. When Ula came from Bavel, I guess, Yativ Abisma Pagima, right?
The other way around.
The other way, okay.
From
Came to
Eretz Yisrael to Bavel.
Got it. He came to Bavel and he got the grand tour of, the palace of Nimrod, and he was tired. It was a hot day in Bavel. And so he sat down on the edge of a broken platform that had been previously part of this temple. So Amalei Rav Yehuda Lu'ula, Rav Yehuda saw Ula and he said, oh my goodness, Harav Shmuel Damar Travayo, Rav and Shmuel both said, Bimush Shnifkam Asor, that a platform for an idol that is damaged is still prohibited to sit on or to use. And Afil Lamanda Amar Ein Ovdin Shvarim, even according to the Mandamar, that you don't worship an idol that has broken down into pieces. That's the idol. Hani mili avodat kochavim tezila b'milta the miflach l'shvarim. Right? It's a little bit denigrating to say I'm bowing down to pieces of an idol. Avohai lochmadle. This is not the idol. This is the support of the idol. So this, even if it broke down, it still retains its covet, its respect, and so you shouldn't sit down on it. So that was his critique. Amarle. So who was his Ula, said back to him, look, no disrespect to Rav and Shmuel, right? And this is always a statement we say. Man yahavlan mi afra de Rav and Shmuel, who could give us the dirt from Rav and Shmuel? Umalina einayin, we would put in our eyes, meaning we're so desirous, respectful. No disrespect. He's about to disrespect them, right? No disrespect to Rav and Shmuel, but I have a different tradition. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, Amri Tervayo, I got the tradition of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who are the Rabbanei Eretz Yisrael. So I guess it makes sense, right? He's coming from Eretz Yisrael and putting aside the Babylonian rabbis and going with the Israeli rabbis. They both said, Bimus shenifgam mutar, that if you have a platform that has been damaged and is no longer being used, you can get hana'ah, you can sit on that, you can rest on that, you can play baseball on it. Because even if you feel that an idol that is broken is still prohibited, that's the idol. The kivan de pochel, since you actually worshipped it, right? Zila bamnilta levatule. You don't want to cancel it. You don't want to look at this and say, I used to spend my whole life worshiping to this thing, and now it's nothing, right? Aval hani shakli. This is just a pedestal. Your pedestal is broken, you get rid of it and get a new pedestal. There's no sentimentality with the pedestal. And therefore, they always cancel it, even if it's just broken a little bit. And so therefore, I go like the Israeli rabbis, like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, no disrespect to Rav and Shmuel, and I'm going to sit on this statue. Tanya Kavati Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. In fact, there's a brayta that supports Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. The brayta says, Bimo shenifgam, if you have a platform that was damaged, mutar, you're allowed to use it. It's no longer, prohibited for Avodah Zara. Mizbeach shenifgam, that if you have an altar of idol worship that was damaged, asur, that still remains prohibited, ach yinatetz rubo, until the majority of it is broken. So a small break, is not enough to permit it. And that's because this rationale, you used it for worship, so you're less quick to abandon it. Now, what's the difference between an altar and a platform? Bimus means even achat. A bimus is referring to one big stone platform, and mizbeach is avanim harbe. And a stone, mizbeach refers to many stones, which is not necessarily the way we have it, but the way they had it in their temples. And says Chizkiya Maikra. What's the verse that supports this explanation? And so another pasuk from Yeshayahu. It says in pasuk, it says in Yeshayahu, Besumu kol avnei mizbeach, when they place all the stones of the mizbeach, ka'avnei gir menupatzot, which I'm reading in English here because I don't know gir menupatzot. Rashi says for gushala. I don't know what that means, but in my English it says they are like limestones that are broken up, right? Menupatzot means they're right, lime, like chalk, correct. That is menupatzot, that is smashed up. Menupatz means to smash. So though in that case, lo yakumo asherim chamanim, they will no longer have their asherah, which are the trees, and the chamanim, which are the sun gods that they would put up. Meaning, what the pasuk is saying is, ika kavnei gir menupatzot, if it's crushed up like into many pieces, then lo yakumun asherim chamanim, then it's not an idol anymore. Ilav yakumu, but if it's not, then it will remain its status as an avodah zarah, and it's still prohibited. And so you've got to really break it down in order to make it permitted. And we will, of course, continue tomorrow with the discussion of how to cancel an avodah zarah. Yashir koach.
Shkoach, thank you.
Miriam, after I get home, we're home all week. So just Cecily's coming home tonight too. So someone will be home.
Okay, fine. So then sometime this week.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Tell everyone.
Okay, Shavua Tov.